You know what? I would connect what you just said with the Apocalyptic Paul stuff, because the Apocalyptic Paul will also talk about the rescue. So it may sound nice because they are talking a lot about the work of salvation is about rescuing human beings from a tyrant. And the tyrant is sin, or all evil powers, sin, death, Satan. But all these powers are outside of us. They are not inside us. So they speak also about rescuing. And what they're saying is not bad in itself. It's right. Christ came and saved us from powers that are beyond ourselves. But Christ came to save us also from the sin that is within us. You can't speak about sin without sinners.
Hi, I'm Adam Smith. I am the director of Theo Global, which is a project of Sola Media, and we are here with Theo Global in Cairo, Egypt. I'm here with Justin Holcomb, Dr. Sherif Fahim from Egypt, and Michael Horton. Justin and Mike are regular parts of Sola Media, and Sherif is a friend of ours for many years. He lives here in Egypt and teaches at the Alexandria School of Theology. Here this week, we're at Theo Global, and we've been talking about humanity, the image of God, and the fall. And as we've done that, it's been fun to hear some of your guys' thoughts and interactions about similarities on different topics you've been presenting and studying. And so we'll get into some of that for the listeners. But I wanted to start just by asking kind of what are we created for? We talked a little bit this week about Dr. Horton, you presented the idea of eschatological anthropology. And so let's just begin with, what were we created for?
Well, those are big words. Anthropology just means the doctrine of humanity when we talk about who are human beings. And eschatological, we typically think eschatology is about the end times, but it's actually about what constitutes the goal of things. So what are human beings made for? That's an eschatological question. What's a good watch? Well, it depends on what it's made for. If a watch is made for telling time, then a good watch is a watch that tells time well. It's accurate. If human beings are created in the image of God, if we exist to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever, then if we're falling short of the glory of God, we're not good human beings. So we are deficient, we're depraved, we fall away from our original purpose. And so what I wanted to stress was the importance of starting, before we talk about the fall and sin and guilt and corruption and the need for, and death and the need to be redeemed from all of that, we need to talk about what God made us for, and that God actually made the human race for glory. And that Adam was supposed to, not you, Adam, but the first Adam, was supposed to fulfill that trial, fulfill all righteousness, so that he would be confirmed in that image and likeness. He would be as much like God as it's possible for a creature to be. And that was his purpose. That was his telos. But humanity wanted to not be like God or glorified by God. Humanity wanted to be God and glorify itself. And we see that today in all sorts of ways, especially in what's called the transhumanism movement, where people want to finally get rid of our bodies that they blame evil on, and upload our consciousness into the net so that we can keep upgrading until finally we are gods ourselves. It's just repeating the sin of our first parents. But the glory, the passion for glory is not itself sinful. It has been warped into self-glorification instead of being glorified by God.
And before we go toward Genesis 3, I mean, if we can hover a little bit more in Genesis 1 and 2, when you talk about image of God, a lot of people try to figure out, okay, is that because I'm creative, or because I have reason, or because there's something spiritual about me that's reflecting God? And we start going through that language of Genesis, Genesis 1:26, 27, 28. So the image of God language. You said something in your presentation, Mike. You said image of God is not religious but political. So you talked about covenant. You also talked about image of God language, kind of ancient Near Eastern image. How does image play out?
Especially Egyptian, and here we are in Egypt.
So can you say some more about that?
Yeah, a lot of research has been done on this whole idea of image and likeness with the background of Egypt rather than Greece.
Yeah.
And which actually, obviously was the biblical background, Egypt, that is. And so it makes sense that we give more weight to what was the case in Egyptian thought. And it wasn't Egyptian religion per se, it was Egyptian politics. The idea was that the pharaoh is the image and likeness of the chief deity of the Egyptian pantheon, Amun-Ra, the sun god. And that is the sort of backdrop. It's a political analogy that the pharaoh is the representative of the highest god, just as he's the highest sovereign, the highest king on earth. He is the representative of the highest king among the gods. Well, here we have God exploiting that background to say, you are my image and likeness. You are my representatives. That's why he says, therefore, be fruitful and multiply, go rule and subdue, bring everything under my dominion. Basically, the way Amun-Ra would talk to Pharaoh.
So the dignity in, as images of God, humans are made to be with God, like God, for God, with God. There's already loaded up. It's not a dignity that is to be achieved, but there's already, by being a vice regent, to have that high a view of human, the crown of creation is already built in, is important for us to see. Because when we get to Genesis 3, we see what is lost and what we traded in for
a mess of pottage,
our own water.
I think we even read Genesis 1 with the lens of the fall, with the lens of Genesis 3, talking about self-glorification, because we are, after the fall, we are seeking to glorify ourselves. So even when we read Genesis 1, the focus is on us. What does it mean for me to be in the image of God? Well, it means my creativity, my intelligence. But if you read Genesis 1 and 2, with the lens of Genesis 1 and 2, before the fall, the goal is not the man, Genesis 1, 26 to 28. I would say the goal is Genesis 2, 1, 2, and 3. The Sabbath, the fellowship, the relationship, worshiping God. This is the goal. And this is why this worship thing, it has to do with those who are created in the image of God, so that they may be able to worship God in his presence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going back to, it's about the relationship between God, instead of self-glorifying way of reading the image of God.
Well, and that's where we would talk about image of God being relational. It's our relationship with God is one of peace. There's no problem. And with each other, the fact that you have, let's make man in the image of God, male and female, he created them. And so you have built-in relationships with God and each other are peaceful. There's harmony. There's, all of that. So it's to try to find out what in us, or what do I do, but who we are in relationship with God and other. And
it's not good for man to be alone, God says. So I'll create a helper suitable for him. And this idea of the image of God, we sometimes think of, again, if we think of it just as something inside of me, it's an individualistic kind of thing, but it's something between God and us and each other, where I actually come to know who I am only in relation to God and others, rather than defining who I am and then figuring out how to link up to God and to others. Herman Bavinck said that the very first consciousness humanity had of God was God consciousness, not self-consciousness. And that's so good. Before he was even aware that he existed, he was aware God existed. And that's such a different outlook than we often find today. There's a covenantal, communal aspect to this image where all of us are expressing this image in corporate worship. The bottom line is, before the fall, we were worthy worshipers of God.
Yes, and this goes back to the idea that the eschatology comes before the end. It's not just something about the end. In fact, we can see the eschatology in Genesis 1 and 2, especially 2 and 3, even before soteriology.
Yeah.
So, because the Sabbath, or this relationship with God that was figured out, or it was shown in the end of the story of the creation, it kind of gives us a glimpse of what the end will look like.
Yeah, because if Adam had fulfilled that as our covenant head, then he would have won the right for himself, for Eve, and for all of us to eat from the tree of life and live forever. We would have been immortal.
Yes.
But instead he...
Revelation 21, right away.
Right.
Revelation 21, right away.
The tree of life, eating from the tree of life finally.
21 and 22, yes.
And so it fits with the idea that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. For the image of God to be related to true righteousness and holiness, and not just our faculties or our abilities or the rationality that we have as humans, or the differences between the roles of different humans, or the skills or the roles. And so that's how it reflects eschatology being the beginning, that what we're created for wasn't just in the image of God for our own skills, our own functionality, our own rationality, but our relation to God, which was broken, and takes us kind of to our next section to discuss of different people, figures, movements have over time tried to define our relationship, humanity's relationship to God, our problem to solve in different ways. And each of you have studied and been presenting on a different group this week. Justin, you talked about Pelagius. Sherif, you talked about the Apocalyptic Paul movement. And Dr. Horton, you talked about transhumanism. And so each of those have their own problem and solution of humanity. If maybe each of you could take a moment to talk about your group or anything else you want to add to the problem and solutions that people have proposed for humanity.
Yeah, I'll jump in with Pelagius, because I think mine's probably the more simple one and less complex and moving pieces. First, your point about how we have a tendency to read Genesis 1 and 2 through the lens of Genesis 3 is so helpful. I just want to come back to that, because we see Genesis 3 is a focus of the rebellion of what Adam did, and the tendency to make Genesis 1 and 2 centered on humanity as opposed to God is just a helpful thing. I just want to thank you for that. But so something happens in Genesis 3. There's the fall, and we can unpack this more, but at the very least, you have sin. Adam is called to, protect the garden and be a steward and multiply and have dominion with him and Eve. And then instead he has this gift of a garden and sides with God's enemy and listens to God's enemy. And throughout Genesis 1 and 2, you have God saying, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. Humans, they're good. And then Eve sees the fruit and sees that it is good for what she wants. And that's the first time the word good is used for someone else. And so assuming the role of God, the prerogative of God to name things, even though God is saying, hey, name some animals. And so it's a misuse of assuming God's prerogative. And so there's a rebellion. And we spent a lot of time, especially you and I did, in our presentations on Romans 5, that in Adam, sin comes, we're in Adam, death is here. And so what happens with the fall? Is the fall simply that Adam was a bad example? Again, not this Adam.
Bad example. Definitely a bad example.
Like, I haven't even thought about that until now. We're talking about Adam. Anyway, and what happened in the fall is that Adam was a bad example. And because he rebelled, he sinned, he gets death. and he was a bad example to everyone else. But there's no original sin. Pelagius was arguing against original sin, which was the theology of Augustine, saying what happens with Adam is that it's like a hereditary disease. Everyone that is in Adam, which is all humans, are corrupted. Their wills are in bondage, broken, wounded, polluted, and they're guilty. They're corrupted and they're guilty. That Adam's guilt is imputed to us, and our wills don't work the way they're supposed to anymore. So the problem with Pelagius was saying, no, that's not happening. We had a bad example, and what we need is a good example. God's grace was that he showed us Jesus as an example.
What would Jesus do?
What would Jesus do? Yes. And then what we need to do is we had a bad example. The first Adam was a bad example. The second Adam is a good example. Yes. And so it's a way of saying the problem is not really with anything about my nature. I do sinful things because I had sinful examples, and not I sin because of my sinful nature. And we can explore that more.
We become sinners because we sin. It's not that we sin because we are sinners.
Okay. So, yes. Is there any other pieces that you all remember?
I think the practical implications were very important. I mean, because what Pelagius would say would put people in a very hard spot.
Yes.
Practically speaking, I mean, because it is a kind of a burden. He's telling everyone, you should do better than that. Mm-hmm. And you don't need a savior. You save yourself. It's another way of salvation by works.
Yeah. If someone is guilty of bad behavior, it's moralism, which is already horrible news. But what happens if Pelagius is applied to a sufferer of someone else's sin, which is, well, how do you solve the problem of guilt? Be better and be like Jesus, is what Pelagius said. Well, how do you solve the problem of being sinned against and suffering, which is basically heal thyself, which is, well,
very harsh.
Don't let suffering dominate you. Yes. No one can disgrace you except yourself.
Yeah, you actually had quotes to that effect from trauma theologians, and you think, these are the people who are supposed to be helping me in my suffering, and they don't believe in original sin. They don't believe it. So at the very least, they should be helping me feel better about myself. But you pointed out in your lecture that it's actually not just that they are theologically heretical, but that it's cruel.
The cruelty of heresy, the
because
cruelty of Pelagianism.
They're telling people who can't get up, get up. Telling people who can't heal themselves, heal thyself.
Why did you let this happen to yourself?
Why did you let this happen to yourself?
It's theological victim blaming. Yes. I mean, it's
just horrible.
You know what it reminds me of is, I just thought about it when you were describing the cruelty of it, was in Pilgrim's Progress, when Pilgrim has the burden, and he's like, I need help with this burden of my sin. And he sees Moses, and he's like, oh, Moses will help me. And he runs over to Moses, and Moses punches him. And then he's down, and then Moses just starts pummeling him. He gets back up, and Moses just, Dusty Rhodes an elbow on him, and it just annihilates him. It's like, that's what Pelagius is doing.
Yeah.
Pelagius is like, you're burdened and wounded? We'll have another, kick you when you're down. So
because it's the law that can save.
Right. That's
right.
what.
And you have the ability to do it.
Yes.
You have the ability.
That's the point, is the whole language of ability.
That's what I
was leading
God can't tell you to do something that you aren't able to fulfill.
Yes.
And this is a point from Christian faith. And your chapters on anthropology, Mike, you make a really important point about don't conflate ability, natural ability and moral ability. And I know others have said that too, but that's where I go to, because Pelagius, and that's so helpful, is talking about you have the ability
to do
well, before the fall, we had the moral and natural ability. After the fall, our moral ability has a problem. Our natural ability of we have a will, well, yeah, it's just curved inward. It doesn't work. And so we do have a will. The problem is that it's enslaved and in bondage and doesn't work the way it's supposed to, because Adam and Eve had true freedom. And now after the fall, we're not able not to sin until we're regenerated and renewed and redeemed. And so that the language of ability is that Pelagius is saying, well, why would Jesus command something that you can't do? Is he playing games? Matthew 5, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And so Pelagius says, well, if he's commanding you to be perfect, you must be able to be perfect.
Yes.
What horrible news.
It is bad news. And usually people, when they think or when they talk about free will, because they are encountering choices that they make every day, they see themselves free, and I think they confuse natural ability with moral ability.
Yeah.
So the question about the will or the free will can never be separated from the nature, the human nature.
Yes.
So if the human nature is corrupt, if the tree is bad, what kind of choices are you expecting?
Of course, we choose whatever we want.
Exactly.
The question is, what do we want?
Yes, yes. So you are free to choose the evil you want.
I think it was Edwards who said it, and maybe it's not. It's like, oh yeah, the wills aren't just free, just doing whatever they want. They're bound by the very nature and character of the one who has the will. I mean, I know other people have said that, but I remember seeing that point that you said in the way Edwards. I thought that's really helpful. We're not arguing about like you don't have agency. We all believe humans have responsibility and agency. The problem is that we direct it in curved inward ways that do the opposite.
Yes.
What the point you made is that we were made for worship and for fellowship. And so what do is instead of worship, because of our fallen will, we do self-worship and idolatry or worship something else. And instead of loving our neighbor, we exploit them.
Yes.
And
We use them.
the misuses,
So then enter Augustine.
Yeah, he fixed everything. So, who says you need rescue. You cannot save yourself. The summary of Pelagius is you have everything you need. God has already given you the ability and the example that you need. Do it and follow it. And Augustine says it's not that easy. There's something wrong with my nature, my will. I'm corrupt and I'm guilty. And so I need a rescue. I need divine I need rescue from the outside of me, and that is in Jesus Christ. And you need grace. Grace isn't just an example, and grace, actually Pelagius said, well, God was gracious. He gave you the ability, and he gave you an example, and he gave you the scriptures to tell you what to do. That was grace, according to
And before that,
Pelagius.
he is giving you forgiveness before
Yes.
all of that, like before even to give you the ability, the forgiveness part.
First.
You know what? I would connect what you just said with the Apocalyptic Paul stuff, because the Apocalyptic Paul will also talk about the rescue. So it may sound nice because they are talking a lot about the work of salvation is about rescuing human beings from a tyrant. And the tyrant is sin, or all evil powers, sin, death, Satan. But all these powers are outside of us. They are not inside us. So they speak also about rescuing. And what they're saying is not bad in itself. It's right. Christ came and saved us from powers that are beyond ourselves. But Christ came to save us also from the sin that is within us. You can't speak about sin without sinners. So the Apocalyptic Paul guys, or all the scholars in this camp, they don't speak much of an individualistic salvation. They don't like this language. They talk more about cosmological salvation. So human beings are in terrible situation because of the evil in the world, the sin in the world, and what they need.
Which usually turns into political liberation, right?
At the end of the, yes.
It's very much environmental. Is that right?
Well, it ends to also to be environmental too. But then Christ came, and what did Christ do in his work? He came to liberate us from the bondage of these tyrants. So at the end of the day, we are not responsible. We are victims. We are enslaved by powers greater than us, and Christ came to save us. But they never talk, or they hardly talk about that this sin is within us, and they don't speak about the guilt at all. In fact, all the legal language or all the forensic language of salvation is kind of totally neglected, if I may say. Even if you ask them about the forgiveness of sins, they speak of forgiveness as kind of a restoration of God's order. They don't speak about that I sinned against God and God's wrath is upon me and I need forgiveness, even before changing my nature. So without forgiveness, how can I love God? How can you love someone who's an enemy to you without reconciling or being reconciled with him? So they water down all the language of guilt. They water down all the language that I am responsible for my sin. and they emphasized the idea that Christ came bringing in the new creation, bringing in the new apocalyptic reality, the already now is here, the new creation started, and now we can participate in this new creation as those who have been freed from the tyrants that have been controlling us. Consequently, the atonement of Christ is not a sacrifice offered to God anymore. The atonement became a way or a means of liberation from these tyrants. And the question would be, why? Why would the death of Christ be the means of liberation? This is a question I don't think there's a clear answer to it.
Why did his blood need to be shed for that to be the result?
For this to be the result. It will just be a kind of someone who is sacrificing himself for you. He's kind of offering himself for you. But the question is, why this is an act of love without understanding that this was presented to appease a wrathful God, or a God who was wrathful against sin, who was against my rebellion. You can't understand why this is an act of love. So although they speak a lot about love, they say we can't speak about God's wrath and God's love at the same time. Those guys who are talking about the forensic element, for them, they are abusing the picture of God. They are saying God is a wrathful God, and this is not true. God is a loving God. And then the question is, why the cross is an act of love if it's not dealing with God's wrath?
One of the great points that you made and emphasized was, hey, look, a lot of what you're talking about is right there in not only in the New Testament, but in the same Paul, who emphasizes the forensic. We're not the ones who reduce it to one or the other. You are.
Yes, it's both.
We're willing to say it's both. But you think of Colossians 2 and Paul saying that God made a mockery of the cosmic powers. It's one of the major verses these people go to.
Yes.
That Christ conquered the powers and made a public spectacle of them by triumphing over them in the cross. But then the next verse says, how did he do this? By taking the list of handwritten transgressions and nailing them to the cross.
Yes.
That's how he triumphed over.
Yes.
And then 1 Corinthians 15, that the sting of death has been taken away. Well, how? By taking away the power of the law to condemn.
Yes.
Hebrews 2. Jesus conquers the one who has the power of death, Satan. He conquers Satan, who's behind all these other cosmic powers doing all these things. How? By being a substitutionary sacrifice.
Yes.
And then, we talked about Revelation 5. There's a lamb on a throne. That is victorious, kingly. It's a throne.
Yes.
And it's a lamb. It's a conquesting lamb, as if slain. A slain lamb. Where do you get a slain lamb from? Leviticus 16 and a sacrificial system. Passover lamb. You have, and so the whole point is that, I love the point, and this is what you were saying, is we don't have to pick between penal substitutionary atonement or Christus Victor. He's a victor because he's a sacrifice. Yes. And that's what love is. Because he loved us while we were yet sinners.
Romans 5.
That's what love is, as opposed to, hey, Sherif, I really love you as a brother.
Yes.
I'm going to walk out there and make sure I get hit by a car just to show you I love you. It's like my suffering doesn't, unless my suffering is a substitutionary thing in your place for your good and blessing, that's just self-harm.
Yes, yes.
It's a horrible moral object lesson.
That's the story of the Exodus, I think. I mean, this is a big story in the whole idea of Christ conquering the enemies, because they will say, okay, see, Pharaoh is the tyrant, the Israelites, they are victims in Egypt, and we need to save them from there. And God came and conquered Pharaoh and get them out of Egypt, which is true. We totally agree with this. But what about the Passover lamb? You have to put the blood on your doors to make sure that your own child be saved from this day. And interestingly, the Passover lamb was a substitute for the firstborn in this house, which was a kind of a representation of the whole of Israel as the firstborn for God himself, his first child. So God is saving his firstborn by sacrificing a lamb. Without the sacrifice, without the lamb being offered, the firstborn in my people will be killed by the angel sent by God. So saving from the wrath of God can only happen by the blood of the lamb. And definitely this means also salvation from Egypt itself. So it's both.
Salvation from Egypt because of the Passover.
Because of the Passover lamb, yes. This was the only way for God to bring them back to the mountain, to Genesis 2, 1, 2, and 3, to the Sabbath, to the worship. It was through this, I'll bring them back by solving the problem of their guilt and saving them from the tyrants, bringing them back to the mountain.
And through that comes the rescue.
Exactly, yes. It's a rescue to God, for God. So
For
you have to be
worship,
reconciled with him. How can you go back to him without reconciliation?
And Mike, you've also been talking a little bit about transhumanism this week as another example of a problem posed and to be solved for humanity. Could you give us just a brief review and introduction to how that goes with the transhumanism movement?
Yeah, very briefly. There are a lot of people working in the AI space, especially, who are talking about this idea of the singularity, which is almost like well, not almost, it is a false eschatology. They call the singularity the event in the very near future. In fact, one of the books is The Singularity is Near. And then the next one was The Singularity is Nearer. It's like, the end is near. But the end is, we'll no longer be human, we'll be gods. And this will happen through technology. And so I was just touching on that briefly and pointing out that, God has hidden eternity and glory in our hearts. By nature, we want glory, and that's not wrong. That's how God created us. He created us for glory. That's what Adam was supposed to, cross the finish line for, to win the right to be glorified, and for all of us to be glorified in him. But because of the fall, we now twist that into self-glorification. And it's ironic that this transhumanist movement uses all the language of Christian eschatology, but it's a parody. Just as Satan's sermon in Genesis and Adam and Eve's assumptions or interpretations about that sermon were parodies of what God promised glory. Satan said God doesn't want you to be glorified. God's worried that you'll be like him, knowing both good and evil. God says, I made you like me.
I'm not worried you're might become. You already are.
But man wanted to have that kind of autonomous, self-creating, self-describing, self-identifying kind of power that only God has. Didn't want to be an imager of God, wanted to be the original. And that's what people are wanting today. Redemption, not of the body, but from the body. So this isn't even as good as what God has planned for those who love him. Ironically, we only become gods by losing our humanity. Whereas in biblical eschatology, we really only become fully human when God glorifies us by grace.
Yes. I couldn't avoid, while you were talking in this lecture, thinking of Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
That, okay.
Let us make a name for ourselves.
For ourselves and building. And it's amazing how it seems kind of religious.
Yep.
They're doing something religious. Even like the story of Abel and Cain as well. Cain was a kind of a religious guy, but he's doing his own way.
Yeah.
So I will save myself in my own way. It's again salvation by works, but it's not just salvation by works. I will be my own savior, and I don't need God.
Right. And I won't bring the bloody sacrifice that God approves.
Yes. Yes, I would do it my own way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bring God flowers or something. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, earlier we talked a little bit about the cruelty of heresy and how, an endeavor like that, which might seek to promise some kind of victory over death, but if it doesn't, how cruel. Whereas the promises that are in Christ appear to us as true, good, and exceedingly beautiful in light of what he has done in offering a solution for both guilt and corruption and what he promises to do in the new creation. And so
the weight of glory, being united to Christ, gives us a weight of glory that can't be compared with the suffering that we're experiencing now.
Well, thank you each for taking the time to reflect and to talk. Sherif, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a joy. It's a joy to be with you, and it's a joy to have you here in Egypt. Yes.